everyone, and welcome back to the Private Pilot Ground School YouTube channel. I'm Sergey, and in this video we'll be covering more aerodynamics, just because you didn't get enough in the last few videos. Right off the bat, I want to mention a few little nuances. First of all, you might hear that lift is generated by Newton's laws. When the propeller spins, it pushes the air back, which pulls the airplane forward, so there's your action-reaction. You might also hear about the Magnus effect, and feel free to research all that. But we're focused on the Bernoulli's principle, the low pressure on top, high pressure on the bottom, and that's primarily how the airplane generates lift. Horizontal component of lift is what happens to your lift when you're in a turn. When you're flying straight and level, your lift is all vertical, meaning it's perpendicular to the wing and it pulls the airplane up. When you turn, your lift gets split between the vertical component and the horizontal component. So some of the lift is used to pull you up, and some of the lift is used horizontally to pull you into the turn. The total lift that you had gets split up now, so you don't have all that vertical lift to keep the airplane up. So the airplane will end up descending unless you give it some more lift. And to do that, you increase the angle of attack. And then when you increase the angle of attack, the airplane will start getting more drag, so it'll slow down, which means you need to add a little bit of power. In other words, when you enter a turn, you have to bank the airplane, then add a little bit of pitch to get the angle of attack a little higher, and then add a little bit of power to maintain the same airspeed. The more you bank, the more lift will be split up and given to the horizontal component of lift, and more altitude will be lost. So in other words, if you bank steeper, you'll have to increase the angle of attack a lot higher in order to maintain your lift, and you'll have to add more power to maintain that same altitude in the turn. So we have the horizontal component of lift that pulls the airplane into the turn. We also have centrifugal force that pulls the airplane in the opposite direction, away from the turn. When those two forces are balanced, we call that coordinated flight. And you can tell whether or not you're coordinated by looking at the inclinometer, or the ball inside your turn coordinator. And your goal is to make sure that the ball is always in the center when you're flying, especially when you're making turns. Now, if the ball is inside or outside the turn, that means there's either too much horizontal component of lift or there's too much centrifugal force, and so you step on the ball with your rudder pedal to get it to the center. This is a perfect spot to talk about g-forces, or what we call load factors. When you're in straight and level flight, you're experiencing 1 time the pull of gravity, and we call that 1g. So most of your flying will be done with 1g. When you bank, you have that centrifugal force pulling you outside of the turn. The steeper the bank, the more centrifugal force you will feel, and you will feel heavier in your seat. And we have a nice little chart that shows how many g's you will feel depending on the angle of bank. At 60 degrees of bank, you will feel 2 G's, or roughly 2 times your weight, so you'll feel like you're twice as heavy as you are. Now, most airplanes do have load limitations, and you can find that in the beginning of the Pilot Operating Handbook. And for a Cessna 152, for example, it's plus 4.4 G's and minus 1.76 G's. When we talk about stability, it refers to the tendency of the airplane to return to its original flight path if it was disturbed by a gust of wind or by pilot input or something like that. So there's 2 different types of stability. There's static, which is the immediate tendency of the airplane to do something, and there's dynamic, or the tendency of the airplane to do that thing over time. And there's either positive, neutral, or negative stability. So let's talk about static stability, and that's the immediate response of the airplane. Let's say you're flying along and you get a gust of wind that pushes you down. A positive response would be the airplane going back up to get back to where it started from. That's a positive stability. Neutral stability would be just the airplane going down at the same rate that it got pushed down, and it would continue on. And negative stability would be the airplane being pushed down and then going further down, making it worse, basically. And that's static stability. Dynamic stability has the same 3 positive, negative, and neutral types, but it's over time. So for example, same scenario, you're flying along, a gust of wind pushes you down. Positive stability would be the airplane basically bobbing up and down until it got roughly to where it started from. And that would be positive stability, positive dynamic stability. Neutral stability would be the airplane got pushed down, and it just kind of continues in that state from then on. And negative stability would be airplane got pushed down, but over time it gets progressively worse and worse, and those oscillations get worse. And those are the basics for stability. If you want to know more, check out the link below. One of the most common questions you'll get on your check ride or your written test is about center of gravity and what happens if it's forward or if it's in the back of the airplane. I think the best way to explain what actually happens is to go through a couple examples and to make them as extreme as I can, that way it'll stick in your head. Let's say you're taking off from some middle of nowhere airport, you're rolling down the runway, you get ready to rotate, and as you do, a moose jumps out in front of you and gets stuck on your landing gear, on your front landing gear, with his antlers. Bummer. So let's kind of fast forward and say you were able to climb and the airplane did fine just getting up to altitude. Now what? Well, what we've got going on is you have a lot of weight in the front, so that's pulling the nose down. So what you need to do is pull back on the controls, get the nose up so that you can maintain altitude. Now what happens when you do that is you increase the angle of attack. And when you increase the angle of attack, you increase drag also. And so what that means for your cruise speed is that you will be cruising slower because you have that extra drag with the angle of attack being so high. What that also means is that your angle of attack is now fairly close to the stalling angle of attack, which means that you will stall at a higher indicated speed on your airspeed indicator than you normally would. Let's say you got rid of the moose, you're flying along, happy and everything, and then all of a sudden, thud, you get a skydiver that happens to land on your tail. How unlucky for them. So what does this mean now? Well, you've got all the weight on the back, so you have to push the nose forward to maintain level flight. And what that means is your angle of attack is going to be really low compared to the last scenario. So low angle of attack means you will be able to have less drag, which means a higher cruise speed. What it also means is it'll take you a long time to get to the stalling angle of attack. So that means by the time you get there, you will be going a lot slower. So you have a slower stalling speed. What this means though is if you do get into a stall, you might not have enough elevator force to push the nose forward and reduce the angle of attack to recover from the stall. So let's do a quick recap. With a forward center of gravity, you will have a slower cruise speed and you will have a higher stalling speed. With an aft CG, you will have a higher cruise speed, you will have a slower stalling speed. But if you stall, you might not recover. And so those two scenarios are what you will get asked about. What happens to the speed, cruise speed, and what happens to your stall speed. Those are the two typical questions. Now, if that explanation didn't really make sense, feel free to read the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge in the description box, or ask questions if it still doesn't make sense after you read that.